The Hunter and the Clever Deer. Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by thick forests and high mountains, there lived a man named Thomas. Thomas was a hunter. He was tall, strong, and quiet. He loved the forest and spent many days walking among the trees. He hunted for food, not for fun. His family depended on him. They lived in a small wooden house at the edge of the forest. One cold morning in October, Thomas took his bow, arrows, a small knife, and some food. He kissed his wife and said, "I will be back before dark." Then he walked into the forest. He planned to hunt a deer. Deer meat was good and would help feed the family during the winter. As he walked quietly between the trees, he heard the sound of birds and leaves moving in the wind. He moved slowly and carefully, trying not to make any noise. He knew that animals could hear very well. After 2 hours of walking, Thomas saw something move far away. He looked through the trees and saw a beautiful deer. It had big antlers and strong legs. The deer was standing next to a small river, drinking water. Thomas stopped and took out his bow. He slowly reached for an arrow. But the deer looked up. It saw Thomas and ran away quickly. Thomas tried to follow, but the deer was fast. It jumped over rocks and ran through bushes. Thomas ran too, but he lost the deer. "This deer is smart," Thomas said. "But I will find it again." For the next 5 days, Thomas went into the forest every morning. He walked quietly, followed the deer's tracks, and listened to the sounds of the forest. Sometimes he saw the deer far away, but it always ran before he could shoot. The deer was clever. It always stayed near water but never stayed in one place too long. One morning, Thomas woke up very early. The air was cold, and the ground was wet. He put on his warm jacket and boots. Today, he said to himself, he would catch the deer. He walked deeper into the forest than before. The trees were thicker, and it was darker. He found fresh tracks and followed them. He moved slowly and carefully. After some time, he saw the deer again. It was eating grass near a small clearing. Thomas stopped and slowly took out his bow. He moved into a good position. He was ready. He aimed carefully. But suddenly, the wind changed direction. The deer smelled him. It looked up, stared at him for a second, and then ran. Thomas chased it. The deer ran through the trees, and Thomas followed. He jumped over logs, pushed through bushes, and tried to move fast. The chase lasted for hours. Thomas was tired, but he didn't give up. He followed the deer's tracks to a high hill. At the top, he saw the whole forest below. It was beautiful. The sun was going down. Thomas sat on a rock and took a deep breath. "I don't understand," he said. "Why can't I catch this deer?" The next day, Thomas had a new plan. He would build a small hiding place near the river. He found a good spot and used branches and leaves to hide himself. He waited for hours. Birds sang, and squirrels played near him. Then, just before sunset, the deer appeared. It walked slowly to the water. Thomas didn't move. He waited. The deer came closer. Thomas raised his bow. He was ready. But then something happened. A small bird flew from a tree and made a loud noise. The deer jumped and looked around. It saw Thomas and ran away again. Thomas lowered his bow and sighed. "This deer is not just fast," he said. "It is lucky too." Days passed. Thomas tried many times, but the deer always escaped. Sometimes he saw it in the morning. Sometimes at night. But he never got close enough. He started to respect the deer. It was smart, fast, and careful. It knew the forest better than any man. Thomas started to think that maybe the deer deserved to live. One day, Thomas followed the deer deep into the mountains. It was cold, and snow started to fall. He was tired and hungry, but he didn't stop. He followed the tracks until he reached a small valley. There, in the snow, were the fresh tracks of the deer. But there was something strange. The tracks moved in circles. The deer was trying to confuse him. Then suddenly, the tracks disappeared. Thomas looked around. No deer. No sound, only snow and trees. It was like the deer had disappeared into the air. He stood there for a long time. Then he smiled. You win, he said out loud. You are better than me. Thomas turned and walked back home. He didn't feel sad. He felt proud. He had met a true challenge in the forest. A clever, strong, and free animal. He knew he would never forget this deer. Years later, Thomas still went into the forest. He still hunted. But he never saw that deer again. Some people in the village said the deer was magic. Others said it was just lucky. But Thomas believed the deer was special. He told his children the story of the clever deer. He told them about the long chase, the hills, the snow, and the final moment when the deer disappeared. And when Thomas became old, he still remembered the deer. Sometimes, when he looked at the forest, he thought he saw it, standing between the trees, watching him quietly. And so, the story of the hunter and the clever deer became part of the village's stories. A story not about killing, but about respect, nature, and the mystery of the wild. The hunter and the spirit of the forest. It had been many years since Thomas chased the clever deer. He was now an old man. His hair was gray, and he walked slower than before. But his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was full of stories. He no longer hunted as often, but he still loved walking in the forest. One morning, his grandson Jack came to visit. Jack was 13 years old. He was curious, full of questions, and loved to explore. He looked up to his grandfather more than anyone. "Grandpa," Jack said, "tell me the story of the deer again." Thomas smiled. "Ah, the clever deer, you've heard it many times." "I know, but I want to hear it again." Thomas sat by the fire and told the story, of the cold mornings, the chase, the hiding place, and the final moment when the deer disappeared. Jack listened with wide eyes. "Do you think the deer is still out there?" Jack asked. Thomas looked out the window toward the forest. "Maybe," he said. "Some people believe it was just a normal deer. But I believe it was something more. Maybe a spirit of the forest. A guardian. It was never meant to be caught." Jack was silent for a while. Then he said, "I want to find it." Thomas laughed. "You are young and brave. But remember, the forest has its own rules. Respect them." The next morning, Jack woke up early. He took a small bag, a compass, water, and some food. He left a note for his grandfather and walked into the forest. He wanted to find the deer, not to hunt it, but to see it. The trees were tall, and the ground was covered with leaves. Jack followed old paths and looked for tracks. He remembered the places his grandfather described. He walked all day, stopping only to rest and eat. By evening, he reached a small river. It looked like the one from the story. He sat on a rock and waited. The sun went down, and the forest became quiet. Then, from the corner of his eye, Jack saw something move. A shadow between the trees. He held his breath. Out of the trees stepped a deer. It looked just like the one in the story, proud, calm, and beautiful. It walked to the river and drank. Jack didn't move. He didn't want to scare it. The deer looked up and stared at him. Their eyes met. Jack felt something strange, like the deer could see inside his heart. Then the deer turned and walked away, slowly and silently. Jack didn't follow. He just watched. And when the deer was gone, he whispered, "Thank you." That night, Jack slept under the stars. In the morning, he returned home. Thomas was waiting. "You saw it, didn't you?" Thomas asked. Jack nodded. "I didn't chase it. I just watched." Thomas smiled. "Good. You did better than I did." From that day, Jack often visited the forest. He didn't tell anyone about the deer. It was his secret, his gift. But something had changed in him. He became more thoughtful, more patient. He listened more to the trees, the birds, and the wind. One winter, Thomas became very sick. Jack stayed by his side every day. One evening, Thomas said, "There is something I want to tell you." Jack leaned closer. "Years ago, after I gave up the chase, I had a dream. I was in the forest, lost. Then the deer appeared and showed me the way home. I believe it saved me. That's why I stopped hunting." I began to understand. Jack held his grandfather's hand. "I understand too." Thomas smiled and closed his eyes. That night, he passed away peacefully. The whole village came to his funeral. People remembered him not just as a hunter, but as a wise and kind man. Jack stood quietly, holding a small wooden carving of a deer his grandfather had made. After that, Jack took care of the forest. He didn't hunt. He planted trees, cleaned rivers, and helped animals. People started calling him the forest keeper. Years passed. One spring morning, a young boy from the village ran to Jack. "Sir, I saw a deer in the forest. It looked special." Jack smiled. "Tell me everything." The boy told him how the deer stared at him, how it moved like the wind, and then disappeared. Jack nodded. "It chose to show itself to you. You are lucky." The legend of the deer continued. Some believed it was a spirit, others a very clever animal. But all respected it. It became a symbol of peace and balance between people and nature. One day, many years later, Jack stood on the same hill where Thomas once stood. He looked over the trees, the rivers, and the mountains. The sun was setting, and the forest glowed with golden light. And then, he saw it. Far away, near the edge of the trees, stood the deer. Its antlers were like a crown, its body strong and graceful. Jack didn't move. The deer looked at him for a long time. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Jack smiled. "Thank you," he whispered again, and he walked down the hill, back to the village, knowing the spirit of the forest was still watching. The return of the forest spirit. Many years passed since Jack became known as the forest keeper. He was now an old man, just like his grandfather Thomas once was. His hair was white, and he walked with a wooden stick. But his heart was still full of love for the forest. People from the village respected him. They often came to ask for advice, about the weather, the animals, or the right time to plant trees. Children loved to sit by the fire and hear his stories, especially the one about the deer. Jack had never hunted again. His life had become one of balance, between people and nature, between memory and the present. One summer day, a terrible thing happened. A group of strangers came to the village. They were not hunters. They were workers from the city, and they brought big machines. They said they had papers and permission to cut trees in the forest. "We are building a road," they said. "It will help the village grow." But Jack stood in front of him. "No road must touch this forest," he said. "This place is special." The strangers laughed. "Old man, this is just land. Trees grow back." But Jack shook his head. "This is not just land. This forest has a spirit. If you harm it, you will regret it." Some villagers agreed with Jack. Others were unsure. The road could bring trade, visitors, maybe even schools and hospitals. But Jack warned them, "If the deer leaves, everything will change." That night, Jack walked into the forest alone. He moved slowly but surely. The moonlight showed him the way. He reached the place where he had last seen the deer, the same hill where his grandfather once stood. He sat down and waited. Hours passed. Then, as the night grew quiet, something moved in the shadows. The deer appeared. It looked just as it did all those years ago, proud, calm, and full of mystery. Jack's eyes filled with tears. "I need your help," he said softly. "They want to cut the trees. They want to build a road. What should I do?" The deer didn't speak, but Jack felt something deep inside, a feeling of peace, and also of warning. The deer turned slowly, walked a few steps, and looked back. Then it disappeared into the forest again. Jack understood. The message was clear: the forest must be protected, not just by him, but by everyone. The next morning, Jack called the whole village to the square. He stood tall, even though he was tired. "My friends," he said, "I won't live forever. But I ask you, protect the forest. Teach your children what it means. If we lose the forest, we lose ourselves." He told them about the deer's return, about the warning he felt. Some people were still unsure, but most of them agreed to stop the machines. They wrote letters, called officials, and fought for the forest. After many weeks, the strangers finally left. The road project was cancelled. Peace returned. Jack felt happy, but also tired. A few months later, he became sick and stayed in bed. Children came every day to sit by his side and hear his stories. One evening, just before sunset, a little girl named Lila came to visit. She was quiet, curious, and had bright eyes. Jack smiled when he saw her. "Lila," he said, "I think you are ready." "Ready for what?" she asked. "To become the next forest keeper." Lila's eyes lit up. "Me?" Jack nodded. "The deer will show itself to you one day. And when it does, you will know what to do." That night, Jack passed away peacefully, just like his grandfather did many years ago. The next spring, Lila started walking in the forest every day. She learned the names of the trees, listened to the birds, and watched the animals. She didn't look for the deer, she just waited. Then one morning, near the river, she saw it. The deer stepped out from the trees. It was silent, calm, and strong. It looked at her and slowly walked forward. Lila didn't move. She understood, and so, the legend continued. The forest had a new protector. The deer still lived, free and wild. And the people of the village never forgot the lessons of Thomas, Jack, and the spirit of the forest.